I've never heard anybody else discuss this because everyone's so fixated on global warming being about.
It's there. It's there for anybody who is willing to do their homework. You know, when somebody goes on my website or whatever and says, "What are your sources?" I'm glad to provide multiple sources going back. I've been collecting this data for decades, you know, and it's there. And I have to ask the same question: why are we ignoring this evidence? You know, why are we? Well, yeah, I think we're ignoring it because climate change has become a political agenda rather than a scientific question. You know, and so because there are political factions that are lined up behind it, you know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is now looked at as being the ultimate source for data on the climate. And bear in mind, they were created by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and given the mandate to go out there and demonstrate that humans are causing climate change. So right from the very start, that was their mission. And they were not told, go and look for natural causes of natural climate variability, study the human. And it's important. I mean, I'm not at all saying it's not important for us to study our own effects on climate. But it's going to be dangerous, I think, if we neglect, you know, what we're seeing right here on these graphs, this graph that I'm showing you, because that's clearly not carbon dioxide. See, if we're told, and we have been repeatedly told, that carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere held relatively steady at about 280 parts per million, right, prior to the Industrial Revolution, and only subsequent to the Industrial Revolution did carbon dioxide start going up. Well, if we assume, just for the sake of argument, that that's correct, well, look at this graph. What we're saying is that if carbon dioxide held steady at 280 parts per million going back hundreds of thousands of years, as Al Gore has actually stated, and as many others have stated, it's not carbon dioxide causing these climate changes, is it?
Well, it can't be.
It can't be.
No. If that's the case, and that's hard science.
This is hard science. Here it is, right
And
here.
that's hard science as well. You're looking at something really crazy, some event.
Yeah, that's my point. Now, the alternative is, okay, are we saying if carbon dioxide is the dominant driver of climate change, and that's what we're seeing here, then what that basically says is that there's some gigantic unknown reservoirs of CO2 that have outgassed into the atmosphere and undermines the so-called consensus view, because so far the consensus view states that CO2 is only...
Will you win a 55-inch machine gun, a golden age Sparrow, an all-expenses-paid trip to Europa? Find out tonight on Dares of Eternity.
This dashed line represents the modern temperature. Like the 20th century average is this dashed line.
That dashed line, what year are we looking at right there?
Right here, this is between 100 and 100. That's a giant.
So what does that represent?
Whoa. Right there. So that's, you know, 15 to 18 times greater.
Now spin the wheel and let us learn against whom you must compete. Let us hear it for our returning champions, the Cabal. desires further proof of your abilities. Must now prepare for our obstacle course. The inconceivable horse proclaims it utterly bonkers.
Roughly 12,900 years ago, give or take to 11,000. So this spike of warming right here is 11,600. Now if we look at the next one here, this graph basically goes to a different realm of evidence. What this shows is the average width of sea level.
Right.
From a churning pool of radiolaria come the Vex. The horse demands more from you. I must oblige. The Imperial pony calls forth a beast laden with treasures. Reap your reward, contestants. Choose the door hiding your final opponent, and the horse shall reward you.
And that has been the dominant theory, that humans caused this mass extinction.
A brilliant choice from tonight's most gifted contestant. Enjoy. Star Horse had your final challenge waiting backstage. Let's bring out the Cabal. challenges beyond all comprehension. Tonight's special guest star. The great steed who trots between the realms thanks you for playing with us tonight. Although we are held in a perpetual void, we hope you will join us next time, right here on Days of Eternity. Good night.
Equivocation that I think is probably going to be the most important book that's come out. This chart especially is really freaking me out. Like looking at the mortality, all the animals, the mass extinction event that must have taken place. One of the things that always bothered me about that idea that human beings killed off the woolly mammoths is that they found these vast fields of uneaten mammoths where there was thousands of them that had died almost instantaneously.
Yeah. which is just, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what did they do? They went on a mass killing orgy of slaughter and then just decided not to eat any of them?
Well, you know, the field evidence itself is inconsistent with that idea. Right here, this is an example. This is one of the many mammoth cemeteries. And what happens is that you can see here that you can see from the shoreline, see that there was a flood. The river rose up to this level, and then when it rose down, it left this in its wake. And what you see here, like this is bone counting at the Berlik Mammoth Cemetery in northern Yakutia, Siberia. Identical deposits are found throughout the Taymyr Peninsula. And what we see here is these massive bone deposits that have been showing up for the last couple of hundred years. Every time that there's, you know, a thawing or a flood, or these things are washed up on the shore of the Arctic Ocean, you know, what we see is that there were huge, huge herds of woolly mammoths grazing, where now the plant material is only 2 inches high. So clearly, it was a completely different climate there. You know, what's interesting is that you had in Siberia able to support herds of woolly mammoths at the same time that half of North America is buried under 2 miles or more of ice.
How is that possible? Just a totally different atmosphere.
I'm still puzzling over that. I have some ideas, but, you know, until I can test these ideas a little further,
So without ice core samples, is it impossible to figure out what the temperature was in Siberia at that time?
No, they can figure out basically based upon fossil plant remains.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that in some cases the tree line was hundreds of miles further north than it is now. And that's clearly, if you've got trees, forests growing now where, you know, 13 or 14 or 15,000 years ago it was permafrost, you know it was warmer, clearly.
So there's still, whoa, what is that? 19th century scene showing ivory floor of the London docks covered by thousands of mammoth tusks from Siberia. This is a drawing, obviously.
Yeah.
Predates photographs.
Yeah. For hundreds of years, thousands of mammoths, entombed mammoths, and mammoth tusks were being exhumed from the Siberian permafrost. Thousands and thousands and thousands of these. And basically, to me, you look at this is just in-your-face evidence that this was not humans doing this. You know, it was not humans that were slaughtering these mammoths and burying their remains.
It's the instantaneous nature would almost be like people had figured out some new thing, like they figured out some like a doom gun, you know, they shot the whole
the doom gun. Well, look at the near extinction of American bison. What brought that about? Trains and high-powered rifles. Right. It was a major technological advancement that was able to bring about the near extermination of the American bison.
There's actually a guy that I'm going to bring on the podcast soon to discuss that. His name's Dan Flores, who is in a big chunk of his intellectual career studying this. And what he believes is that the bison had a massive population jump that was directly correlating to smallpox epidemic, the Native American people. And that when the United States, when we look at the United States history, and the big stacks of woolly mammoths, the big stacks of bison skulls we always look to, like that was a very unusual population of bison that existed because the Plains Indians had experienced this massive extinction event. And then when they had incorporated the horse, like the horse and apparently the American Indians, the Native Americans rather, were on their way to extirpating the bison even before we came along. But then they died off in this massive death scenario with smallpox and all the different diseases that the Europeans had brought over here. And then the mammoth population, the bison population had grown like almost unnaturally. It had been much larger than it had ever been in the past. And that's when the United States was established, and that's when all the Western European immigrants had come along and started killing off all these bisons. It's really a very interesting subject.
Yeah, and it's an interesting idea, and it's plausible. I haven't looked into that. I assumed, and maybe wrongfully, but I had assumed that the bison population had been relatively stable. I am not convinced, though, that that there was this massive die-off of the Native American population yet. I'm not convinced. Maybe,
Really?
well, because I haven't looked into it yet. But one of the things I have seen is that the assumption there is predicated upon that the Europeans arrived and brought the diseases that Native Americans had no defenses for. But the thing is that there's so much evidence now showing that there were lots of explorers and immigrants to the New World prior to the arrival of the Europeans. Whether it was the Chinese, the Phoenicians, and I'm not necessarily saying that's credible, none of it's been proven, but there's some interesting data out there that suggests, and there are a number of books written that, again, I haven't accessed it, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm an authority on that, because I'm not. But if some of that turns out to be credible, it would suggest that there was a lot more interaction between the Native American population and other groups around the world, which, if true, to me kind of somewhat undermines this idea that they were, completely susceptible to the introduction of these, to these foreign diseases. But again, I've got an open mind. I'll wait and see. I'd like to see what he says. I'd like to hear his ideas.
For anyone interested, he has a paper in the Journal of American History. It's called Bison Ecology and Bison Diplomacy, the Southern Plains from 1800 to 1850. I just looked for it online. There's a preview that's available, but to download the entire paper or book, I'm not sure which one it is, it's $19.
Yeah, and what journal is it in?
The Journal of American History from September of '91. And like I said, he's working on a new book right now, and I'm trying to get him to come in, but it's very difficult while he's in the middle of...
You said September of 1991?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can probably access it.
Dan Flores is his name,
okay.
And just the information that I got about it is pretty mind-blowing.
Okay.
But
sounds interesting. I want to know more. Thank you for that, Joe.
Yeah, please. Now let's go back to that photo that you have on your desktop that you were going to explain to me, but we decided not to talk about it before the podcast because it's so incredible. That you said all this incredible change that we're looking at, the geological structure, all that took place within just a week.
Yeah. Well, let's go to this. We'll come. I've got that. We'll come to that. This is a satellite photograph taken from about 500 miles up. And what you see here, this is southeastern Washington. And what you're looking at here is part of what's called the Columbia Basalt Plateau. This is part of the terrain that we crossed when I was with Graham. What you see here is that you have an area of, if you look here, you can see differentiate between the pixels and the actual squares. Like you see this red area down here is area that's actually being farmed. And it's because this is an infrared photograph, and so what happens is that the areas that are being cultivated will show up warmer than the surrounding areas. This whole plateau is covered in this stuff called loess, L-O-E-S-S, and it's a type of very fertile soil that has a rather mysterious and controversial origin. We won't get into that right now, but in some places this loess layer is hundreds of feet thick over a dark basalt bedrock that is a result of these massive outflows of basaltic lava that came out, that extruded between about 6 million and 16 million years ago, right? The hot spot that was the ultimate origin of this basalt is now where Yellowstone is, which so you can make that connection there. The Yellowstone supervolcano, yeah. But what you have here is that you have the lighter areas is where this loess topsoil still exists, and the darker areas is where the underlying dark basalt is showing through because the loess was washed away. So what this is your typical, the geological term is anastomosing, and basically that means a branching flow pattern of the water. And you can see that very clearly here, that the water came off of this river, which is the Columbia River up here, and flowed over the landscape and washed away the basalt and left these gigantic channels in its wake. And there's more over here to the east. There's more over here to the west. And if we look at actually this, let me go to a different program here. I think it'll actually have some. That actually I think has the picture in it that you were seeing. Now, what we're looking at here is what's been called the Missoula Flood, right? Named after the town of Missoula, Montana. Missoula is in a basin that was part of this hypothesized giant lake that presumably caused this flood, right? And again, there was an ice dam. There was this ice dam. The ice dam broke, and as soon as this thing comes up, I will be able to show you some slide. Here we go. Let's see. Here we go. It should be coming up right here. While that's coming up, we'll look at this slide right here because this will kind of give you a picture of the Earth as it was during the height of the Ice Age.
So wow, that's pretty deep. The sheets of ice go pretty far down. That's amazing. Canada didn't exist.
Canada didn't exist.
Wow.
Yeah.
Poor Canadians.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And you know, the ice. Part of it is, a lot of in the Midwest now, the farming belt of America is basically, growing out of the fertile soil that the ice scraped off of Canada and dumped, down in Minnesota and Iowa and Wisconsin and so on. So, someday they may want that back, but we're not going to let them have it.
It's fascinating when you look at that there was this big ice cap, but then the areas around it, no ice. And why was that?
Well, that's one of the mysteries. Again, like over here in Siberia, you can see over here, this is where all the woolly mammoths were, giant herds of woolly mammoths, and it appears like it may have been warmer than now during the ice, which is very odd.
There's some ice up there? Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, there's some ice up there. Sporadic glaciers, but nothing like what we see in northwestern Europe over here. This was called the Fennoscandian ice sheet, and the ice sheet over North America actually consisted of two ice sheets: the Laurentide, which was centered over Hudson Bay, and the Cordilleran, which was centered over the Canadian Rockies. And in this particular slide, you can see here. This was the Cordilleran over here, over the Canadian Rockies, and this was the Laurentide was much bigger, see? And then there was an area between the two, right here, which has been theorized as, at one point, having been a corridor, called the Ice-Free Corridor, and migrants from Paleo-Indian migrants from Siberia would have come across Alaska and down through this corridor here to the lower United States, and ultimately down here to South America. And it was that group, these groups of bands of Paleo-Indian hunters that, according to the overkill or blitzkrieg hypothesis, wiped out the mega mammals as they passed by. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here, this kind of will show the coastlines of the world during the Ice Age, and let me just escape out of this so that we can zoom in a little bit and look at it closer. Okay, so here would be, as we see now, and
this is modern coastline.
This is modern coastlines, and now I'm gonna jump to. This is actually only 300 feet lower than now, and quite a bit different. Let's just look at the United States, North America.
That's amazing. There's a lot more United States.
Yeah. Now check this out. Okay. Now here's North America as it is now, and you see up here, this is what's called. This is the Bering Strait right here between Alaska and Siberia, right? During the Ice Age, this whole area was exposed because of the lowered sea level. And we'll go one slide further, and you will see. Take a look now. Watch what happens up there in Beringia. Boom.
Wow. So it's all land.
It's all land. and it's connecting North America to Siberia, and that's all drowned.
Well, I didn't understand that. See, I always thought that the Bering Strait was an ice mass. I thought it was during the Ice Age that there was some sort of
Yes.
that it was ice, but it's not. It's land.
No, it's land.
Wow.
And it's not glaciated. And it was home to these extraordinary herds of megamammals that ranged over these thousands and thousands of square miles. I mean, the drowned area is bigger than modern Alaska.
So how long ago is this?
Well, this is, right at the end, up till the end of the Ice Age. Between like 15,000 years ago.
So 15,000 years ago, no glaciers in this area. This is all just land, and there's animals living in it, and people are walking back and forth. Essentially, it was a continent. It was connected. It was all one continent. It was all one.
It was all one continent.
Wow, that's amazing.
And the coastlines of the world. Look at Florida out here.
Wow.
It's double the width of the modern peninsula.
Yeah, it's enormous. And it's so close to Mexico, too. It's almost like a little boat ride.
Now, here is Indonesia, and, where stories, which I don't know how credible they are, but, there are stories like Lemuria and the Pacific and all of that. Again, I don't know how credible those are. I think the Atlantis story actually has a little more credibility. We talked about that last time somewhat. But here's the modern, and you can see the light blue is the coastal shelf area, right? Now, let's go back. We're going to drop sea level 300 feet, and then you'll see here the enormous change.
Whoa.
So again, enormous areas of land were drowned by the rising sea levels. Remember this, now when we look at the rise of modern cities and modern civilizations, where did they first show up?
On the coasts.
On the coasts, right, at the mouths of rivers, on the coastlines. And during the Ice Age, where would have been the most obvious prime habitable real estate? Down close to sea level, right? So if there were cities built, if there were thriving communities during the Ice Age, they're now 400 feet under the water.
It's so amazing that all of these stories of floods, the Epic of Gilgamesh, Noah's Ark, all of these stories seem to really correlate with all this data. They all seem to coincide.
That's exactly the point.
It's so weird. Most people would think about the story of Noah's Ark, like, oh, it's just crazy old horse shit. But it's most likely they're basing it on something that happened very rapidly in their area.
Yeah. Now, of course, we're most familiar with the story of Noah's Ark, because of the Judeo-Christian tradition. But there are hundreds, literally hundreds of stories from all over the world that parallel the story of Noah. Deucalion, Xisithris, Utnapishtim, Manu. The list goes on and on of these culture heroes that somehow had foreknowledge of this impending disaster and were able to take steps to preserve themselves, their family, some diverse cross-section of species, and they all have this, similarity. They all parallel. Now, my way of looking at it is this. Okay, we now know from the hard geological record that massive floods have taken place on the surface of the earth. Massive floods, right? Beyond anything that we have even imagined, right, up until a decade or a few decades ago. They're real, okay? On the other hand, we have stories and myths and legends repeatedly. It's probably the most ubiquitous of all the stories that we've inherited from the past, is this story of this gigantic world-destroying flood that occurred, right? Now, on the one hand, we have the hard geological record, which shows there were giant floods. Then we have these epic tales and myths from all over the world about giant floods. Do we now dismiss those floods, those stories out of hand and say, oh, that's just superstitious, pre-literate, pseudoscientific nonsense? I think we'd be making a big mistake to do that. Now, if we accept that those flood stories, and maybe they have been altered through the time and through the telling, represent something real, what about the other elements of the story? The fact that in so many cases there was somebody that had foreknowledge. Do we dismiss that out of hand as well? Or where does that come from? That there was one group of people, small group of people, that saw this thing coming and prepared for it, and others who basically paid no attention.
Maybe they were just preppers. Maybe there's the preppers of 10,000 years
The
ago.
preppers of 10,000 years ago.
On those TV shows.
That explains it right there. One last slide quick here. Here's Europe. Look at the British Isles. Right? Now we'll drop sea level. No British Isles.
That's incredible.
See, that's what I was saying earlier when we started talking. I mean, the world of 15,000 years ago was so dramatically different than our modern world that, you know, it's almost difficult to conceive until you start looking at things like this.
And this was all during the Ice Age.
Yes.
And so the melting of the glaciers just changed everything as we thought. And this is while human beings were absolutely alive. So.
Absolutely. No question. Human beings were alive, yes. Okay. So we'll start looking at some of these pictures here. This is from western Montana. You know, it says in Genesis 7:19, the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills were covered. I want you to take a look, because you can see many mountains in western United States, if you know what you're looking at, that have this on them. You know what those are? Those horizontal lines?
They look like where the shore.
They're shorelines. Exactly, they're shorelines.
That's absolutely what they are?
That's absolutely what they are. They're shorelines. Reaching right up to the very tops of the hills, you see. And basically what you had was you had this enormous gush of water filling these mountain valleys almost to the mountain peaks and then draining away. And as it drained away, it left this succession of shorelines etched into the hillside.
Wow.
And all along the pathway of the floods, we're going to see stuff like this. This was our first stop with Graham. This is La Tourelle Falls. This is that basalt I was talking about. Look at this stuff. There's layers of this basalt.
Well, that's you guys underneath it?
I don't think in this picture. I think I took this picture about 10 years ago. But yeah, I have pictures of me and Graham under there.
Well, dude, you're so tiny. That's so crazy. It's so big.
Right. Now, here's what you've got to picture, Joe. Picture you've got this nice, gentle valley with a nice river, very pastoral scene, you know, trees and stuff, probably, you know, mammoths and herds of these animals grazing along the side of this peaceful river with gentle valley slopes. Here comes this massive flood, and we're talking about perhaps a flood wave 800 to 1,000 feet high coming through. As it comes through, it's ripping up everything in its path. And what it does is it now changes the profile of this valley from this gentle profile to down cutting 800, 1,000, 1,200 feet or more into the bedrock, right? So now, prior to the passage of this giant flood, you had streams and nice little rivers flowing into the main river, which in this case was the Columbia. What happens is after the passage of this flood wave, it sheared off the sides of the channel. So now, rather than a gentle slope, you've got sheer cliffs 400, 500, 600 feet high. These pre-flood streams and rivers come up, and they're now waterfalls. And that's what we're looking at right here in this picture, if that makes sense to you. And you notice how you've got this undercutting here. That undercutting only occurs when you have enormous, intense turbulence in the water doing this. You see, the water doing this will undercut. See, this modern waterfall here had nothing to do with the creation of this cliff. This cliff was cut, again, probably in a matter of days to weeks by the passage of these giant floods. And there's dozens of these waterfalls that are left. They're called, and these are called hanging valleys. They can be produced by glaciers, but they can also be produced by enormous, intense flood waves. This is your typical, not typical. This is a bar, a gravel bar, but in this case it's a boulder bar. Now if you've ever done any walking along a river or a creek or along the beach and you've seen ripples in the sand, and they're typically, you know, if you've got water that's a foot or 2 feet deep, you'll have ripples that are maybe an inch or two high. What we're looking at here is a flood bar that's 3 miles long. It's up to 250 feet above the modern river. And the ripples that you can see here are up to 50 feet in height and 350 feet in wavelength. This was produced, again, by gigantic flood flows. And if we look right over here, that's a 3-story building you see right there for scale.
Oh, wow.
So this gives you an idea. It's features like this that are just unequivocal in terms of realizing that this is not pseudoscience. This really happened.
And does this date back to a very specific time?
Yes, to this 13,000 years.
So it's everywhere. Everywhere.
Yeah.
You're seeing this. You're seeing it geologically. You're seeing it in ice cores. You're seeing it in fossils. You're seeing
Yes.
Wow.
This is evidence of the big meltdown.
Has anybody ever tried to debate you on this stuff?
I would certainly welcome debate. I don't claim to have the final word on this, but here's the thing. I've interacted with a lot of geologists that are studying this, professional geologists that are studying this. What I can tell you is that in most cases, the geologists that are studying this, it's basically something they're doing in their spare time.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are engaged, either in the energy industry or working for government for other purposes. What you actually will see here, though, when you begin to look at the trend in the evidence, is that I think that the geological community is moving much closer to a scenario like I'm describing. And right now there's actually a controversy because, some of the older guard is wanting to defend this idea of the Yokalaups, this giant lake draining out. There are a group of Canadian geologists, though, who are challenging that under leadership of a man who may now be retired named John Shaw, who goes back to the 1980s and began a reinterpretation of a very ubiquitous glacial feature called drumlins, and that were. I can show you some pictures of them here after a bit. They're very interesting. They look like inverted boat hulls. And it was assumed, and they're always associated with the locations of the glaciers and the ice sheets. So it was therefore assumed that they were somehow created by the glaciers themselves. But glaciers tend to grind things that they're moving over and level things off and scratch them and leave striations and all of this, abrasion. These drumlins are smooth, streamlined features. What Shaw first proposed back in the late 80s was that they had actually been produced by water flowing, massive amounts of water, flowing under the glaciers. And there's a very similar. The critic said, well, where did this water come from? And he said, well, I don't know. It must have been enormous subglacial lakes, subglacial reservoirs. The critic said, well, there's no way that a reservoir as huge as your floods would require could have existed under the ice. Therefore, your subglacial floods didn't exist. And that was, to me, the fatal weakness in his theory was to explain where the water came from. But I think now we can explain where it came from.
And you believe it's an asteroidal impact?
Again, by default, we look at all the cross-section of possible explanations within the realm of nature. We can go through and we can eliminate this one, and what we're left with is one that of itself would be fully capable of doing it.
Fully capable and makes sense that it would happen instantaneously.
It would make sense that it would happen instantaneously.
Any other sort of thing that would...
Yes.
So is there an impact crater that corresponds to this timeline?
Well, that's what I'm working on.
Try to find it?
Yeah, and I think I've got a pretty good idea, but it's going to take some field research, and next summer I'm planning to do some more field research.
Is there an idea where it hit?
Yeah, I have several ideas.
You don't want to talk about it? Keep it mum?
At this point.
Stealing
but when it's time to reveal it,
okay,
let's do it here.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that. Well, you've shown several impact craters. You showed a bunch last time you were here. The one in Australia, that was, I believe you said 5,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody.
Hypothetically, it hasn't been proven yet because again, some of these more recent craters of the last 10,000 years, some of these that have been hypothesized are actually on the bottom of the ocean. The Burkle crater that I think we talked about on the bottom of the Indian Ocean, it's under 2 miles of seawater. So until we can actually get back there and do more in-depth sampling and examination, it'll be impossible to prove it. But I think that the evidence is strongly supportive of that possibility, that maybe 5,000 years ago there was a significant impact into the Indian Ocean that could have caused enormous tsunami waves. Now, I actually posted one of the, somebody, called into question some of the things I had said in the last interview about tsunamis, and that that the things I was saying weren't really tsunamis. So I actually wrote an elaborate response to that, which is posted on the Sacred Geometry website, where I've gone into great detail, showing that the evidence really, in the end, I think does support the idea that there had been enormous tsunamis, possibly hundreds of feet high, sweeping over the coastlines of the Indian Ocean, probably around 5,000 years ago. That could have been the origin of some of the flood myths.
And your timeline, where this mass extinction event occurred, where the massive warming occurred, all of that also coincides with the discovery of this nuclear glass all over Asia and Europe, which is somewhere in when they do the core samples of around the same area, right? Around 12,000 plus years ago?
Yes. What we can see here, we'll go through a second. This is some of the research. You can see this is very typical. The mysterious onset of the Younger Dryas. Now, this has been the kind of the consensus view, is that, okay, we don't have an explanation. The Younger Dryas, remember, that's that interval between those two spikes, right? Where you have the warming, then the snap back to glacial cold, and then the warming again. So that interval in between is the Younger Dryas. So here they're saying the mysterious onset of the Younger Dryas, the 1,300-year-long Younger Dryas cold reversal, and you notice the dates, 12,900 to 11,600. That means calendar years before present. So what they've done is they've calibrated this from radiocarbon dating, which is not necessarily going to be the same as the actual calendar years. So those dates are very interesting. 11,600 years ago, you may recall from our last interview, is the date given by Plato for the subsidence of Atlantis. 11,000. I mean, he says that Atlantis subsided. Anybody can read this if they want to pick up Timaeus and Critias, the two dialogues that he describes Atlantis in. He gives that date 9,000 years before this exile of Solon in Egypt, which took place in 600 BC, roughly. So 600 BC in roughly is 2,600 years ago. Add that to the 9,000 years, and there's your 11,600. So now what has happened is 2,500 years ago, Plato gave a date, which would seem to suggest that something immense happened in the Atlantic Ocean, and you had an island complex that sank, perhaps from rapid sea level rise. Now, 2,500 years later, here's modern science coming up with the exact date, showing, hey, there was a massive meltwater pulse into the ocean at that date. Now, at this point, nobody within mainstream science is going, oh, well, see, he doesn't mention here, oh, that's the date given by Plato. They don't say that, but it is the case.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's so amazing. Now, Plato, he was told that, right? It was all through stories. Right?
It was handed down. Solon handed it down. Let's see if I can remember this. Through Drapidas to Critias the Elder to Critias the Younger, then Critias the Younger, I guess, to Socrates. Actually, at the forum where Plato would have heard it would have been the Socratic Forum, where it was told. So I think there was like 3 generations between Solon and Plato.
The wise men of the time, or the people that were in charge of disseminating knowledge back then, it was such a critical job.
Critical job, yes.
No internet, no books.
And the whole thing was that the whole emphasis was on the oral transmission had to take place without not one iota of change. It had to be transmitted from mouth to ear, unbroken, without change, without alteration.
Which has always been the issue with human beings, hence that telephone game.
Yes.
You know, you tell someone something,
right.
They tell you something.
But if you start out, and you know, it's going to be the same with Native Americans. The Native American storytellers have to go through a very long, arduous term of initiation to show that when they tell the story, it's going to be exactly like they heard it. That's one of the basis of modern Freemasonry, too.
We need to get that with today's modern gossip.
Yeah.
We need to nail that.
But let's just run through a quick succession here of some of the most recent research. Shock-synthesized hexagonal diamonds in Younger Dryas boundary sediments.
Whoa.
Now, these shock-synthesized hexagonal diamonds only occur. There's no known natural process that will produce them except for the intense heat and pressures of a cosmic impact.
Whoa.
Okay.
And what year was this study?
Oh, this has been very recent. This is probably within the last 10 years.
There was something
Since 2007. This is probably around 2011.
There was something that was released very recently about micro diamonds and micro diamonds corresponding.
Last summer.
Yeah, and that also was the same timeline. So it's just like the evidence keeps accumulating in this time period that something hit us.
Yes.
The micro diamonds, the nuclear glass, the spikes in warming that's observable on the ice cores.
All correlates.
The mass extinction events of all these animals.
Yes.
This is an event.
This is an event.
Well, this is crazy that you're the guy talking about this event. I mean, this is really nuts. but not anything taken away from you, but there's so few people beating this drum that there's so much information. We're talking about hard data. Oh, you've shown on this show 3-4 different examples of hard data that points to this event.
Well, see, here's the thing. Modern science does tend to get over-specialized. And so what happens is the guy looking at extinctions might not be looking at, glacial melting. The guy who's looking at glacial melting isn't, the geologist is not looking at what's going on in the sky. They're not looking at, traditions from thousands of years ago. So what it does is, because of the power of this specialization, I mean, the specialization is extremely powerful, but its shortcoming is that it's easy to miss the big picture. What that does is opens the door for generalists, guys who are just, people who are just, I said guys, men or women, anybody who's curious about this stuff, to look into it and try to see the big picture. Why am I bringing this? Well, it's just because for 40 years, I've been obsessed with this stuff. And, I read 2 or 3 scientific articles every single day, and have done so for 40 years plus. So that adds up after a while. And I don't just read them, I study them, I take notes, 2 or 3 every single day. So you figure, what is that? That's 1,000 a year. You go back 40 years, that means I probably read something in the order of 40,000 scientific articles from anthropology, geology. Well, I studied geology and astronomy in college, so, I have some academic background in that. But basically what I have done is tried to piece together the big picture, because early on I saw nobody's doing that. Nobody's doing it, really. And some of the guys that are out there doing it are not doing it with academic rigor. They're bringing in all kinds of weird stuff, which makes it easy for the critics to attack them and dismiss them as being fringe science.
They're throwing some woo into the mix.
They're throwing some woo into the mix, yeah. In fact, one of the Rational Wiki entry on me says something about Randall Carlson and his woo, and that's all it says. So I took that as a sort of a compliment.
Well, people love to be able to dismiss anything that's not mainstream, right?
It's outside, yeah. Because there's this cult of authority. That's why you hear somebody says, well, what does a real scientist say about this? What does a real scientist say about this flood? And I might say, well, which real scientist? Vic Baker, Richard Waite, Roy Breckenridge. I've read or talked to almost every scientist that's done work on the Missoula flood. So I know what they're saying and what they're thinking, and what they've written. So when you say, well, what do the real scientists say? Well, okay, let's get a little more specific. Who are you talking about? Because there are different points of view. Are you talking about John Shaw's idea? Or are you talking about, Victor Baker's ideas or any of the others? Well, and that's the thing. They say that because they don't really know. They've got this idea in their mind that there's this authority that's got it all explained, which makes it easy, right? Because if somebody's got it explained, then we don't need to concern ourselves with it or think about it. Right? So what I say is, okay, forget about who says what. Let's just look at the facts. Let the facts dictate to us what the meaning of all of this is. And let's look at all points of view, because that's what I try to do. I've got in my archives here, I've got, not only the research that supports the idea of a cosmic impact back during the Younger Dryas, but the criticisms of it as well. And I go, okay, how can we explain those criticisms? And in the give and take of science, that's part of the process. That's how it evolves. Because somebody puts out a new idea, you're supposed to attack it, and then if it withstands the assault, the onslaught, that shows that it's a credible idea. You know, it's like a last man standing sort of thing. And I think that the cosmic impact really is going to end up being the last man standing.
Well, it seems like there's so much evidence that you're bringing up that's so hard. You know, the how do you say that word? Chondrite. Chondrite-like mineral from black matte. I mean, all the various things, the microdiamonds, the nuclear glass, the mass extinction events, the evidence of the
flooding,
warming, the flooding,
the sea level rise,
all of it, all in this one area.
Yeah. And this is basically saying chondrites are a type of meteorite. So this is saying chondrite-like material. In other words, material that would have had its origin in space. From the black matte. Now this black matte is really interesting. I'm going to show you a couple of slides of it, because this black matte layer, it's black. The reason it's black is because it's so loaded with soot. And what is soot the result of? Fire, right? So let's go through here. Yeah, this discovery of a nano diamond rich layer in the Greenland ice sheet. So nobody had looked. But when these guys, Richard Firestone and James West and James Kennett, these other scientists that are working on this Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, said to their colleagues, check out the Younger Dryas boundary layer 12,900 years ago and see if there's anything that shows up there. They did, and what do you suppose they found? Here it is right here, a nano diamond rich layer. So there it is showing up in the ice sheets. Here's new evidence from a black matte site in the northern Andes supporting a cosmic impact 12,800 years ago. Very high temperature impact melt products as evidence for cosmic airburst impacts 12,900. So they haven't. They're getting closer and closer to refining the date, but it's coming in 12,800 to 12,900 years ago. Wildfire and abrupt ecosystem disruption on California's northern Channel Islands at the Alarad Younger Dryas boundary at basically 12,900. 12.9 Ka means 12,900 years ago. K, is the universal, means 1,000.
It's great. It's all the same. Everything keeps coming back the same date.
Yeah. Nano diamond rich layer across 3 continents, consistent with major cosmic impact of 12,800 calendar years before present. Evidence from central Mexico supporting the Younger Dryas extraterrestrial impact hypothesis. Evidence from northwestern Venezuelan Andes for extraterrestrial impact, the black matte enigma. Evidence for deposition of 10 million tons of impact spherules across 4 continents 12,800 years ago. See, it's coming in, man. It's coming in abundance. And what's gratifying to me is I theorized this 25 years ago.
Wow.
And to see now the hard evidence coming in, supporting a scenario I had pieced together from all of these different realms of knowledge, is very gratifying.
What was the seed in your mind that led you to be obsessed, for lack of a better word, with this? And I don't think lack of a better word. I think it's pretty accurate, right, with this subject.
Okay. I guess it's time to come clean.
I was on mushrooms. I was on top of a mountain.
Well, no, you're actually pretty close.
Yeah?
You are. Okay, 1969.
Oh, that's a good year for mushrooms.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't mushrooms, but it was something in the family. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to a rock concert, right, in the beautiful summer day, early summer, 12,900 years ago. No. 1969, right? Okay, so it's on a field next to a little airport in just out southwest of the Twin Cities, Minnesota, which is near where I grew up. Okay, the Minnesota River flows through there, right? Minnesota River flows into the Mississippi. I think I'll have some slides coming up here I can maybe show you. Okay, so what we have here is that in the middle of this thing, between bands or whatever, I wandered off from the main area where the crowd was gathered to listen to the music, and I walked over to these 200-foot high bluffs overlooking the valley of the Minnesota River. Now, the Minnesota River currently flows in a little channel at the bottom of this valley. And I'm standing up on this hill, and I'm looking down at this Minnesota River, hundreds of feet below me in this channel. And 3 miles, 4 miles across, I see another set of bluffs matching the ones that I'm standing on. And I had this, all I can say is it was kind of a revelation that I'm looking down here at this little river flowing in a channel. And then I'm seeing just a gigantic version of that same channel, but it's 3 and 4 miles wide. And I just looked at that, and it was almost as if, for a short period of time, I got transplanted out of time or something. I don't know how to explain it.
You could see this raging river.
I had this sense that this whole thing was a gigantic river at one time. I came away from that with this idea planted in the back of my brain, and it bugged me for years after that, right? And it was maybe 5-6 years, this is now into the 70s, there was not a whole lot on catastrophism available in the 70s. There was, Immanuel Velikovsky, one of the forerunners, but, he came up with some really wild ideas that made it very easy for mainstream science to dismiss him. But he came up with some really solid ideas, too. His book, Earth in Upheaval, basically was just a documentation of all of this geological evidence for great catastrophes in the history of the Earth. I think he misinterpreted the cause of those catastrophes, but nonetheless, when you look at the criticism, you've heard of Immanuel Velikovsky, right? Velikovsky,
I've heard of him.
Okay, well, he was famous best-selling author, one of the big best-selling authors in the 1950s, maybe in a sense a forerunner of in fact, Graham Hancock has been compared to Velikovsky now and then. I've actually seen some of that. Although Velikovsky's work, I don't think was anywhere near as credible as Graham's. Graham is very assiduous in his referencing and his detailing and so on. Velikovsky went way off into this really weird astrophysics to explain his theories of geological catastrophe, which again allowed the critics to basically dismiss everything he had done. But his book, Earth in Upheaval, I think has upheld the test of time. Where basically in the 1950s he was accumulating all of this evidence suggesting that there had been catastrophes in Earth history, and it was, like I said, a bestseller, but the mainstream scientific community was very dismissive of it. Okay, and then after that you had a book called by Charles Hapgood called The Path of the Pole. I think it came out in '76. And he in there theorized that there had been a sudden pole shift that had brought about, the quick freezing of the mammoths and the end of the Ice Age and so forth. So, I was familiar with that stuff, and I would read that stuff just out of curiosity, because that was some of the stuff that was out there, and somebody would say, hey, did you read Velikovsky? And so as I was reading this stuff, I would keep thinking back to this image I'd had of this, and then in the early 80s, I was talking to somebody. I actually gave one of my very early lectures on this stuff, and there was somebody who had a degree in geology who stood up and said, no, that valley that you're talking about was created over millions of years. I said, I don't think so. And we kind of got into it a little bit, but what that did was it kind of pissed me off. And I said, okay, I'm going to research this thoroughly. And I did. I thoroughly researched it. I went and I found every single thing that had been written on it and discovered that there's actually mainstream geologists that have said, yeah, that river channel, that giant river channel was actually created by a huge meltwater flood. And they estimated that its volume, they called it River Warren, and they estimated that its volume might have been 4,000 times greater than the modern Minnesota River that's flowing in there. So I felt very vindicated from that, and this was by the early 80s. So that was like one of the key things. There was other things, I spent the summer of 1970 mostly sitting on a mountaintop in Colorado in a hut that I had built, studying and reading stuff and traveling. This was back in the days when you could hitchhike and travel all over, and I think at one point I was with a buddy and we were in his old camper van, and other times I was hitchhiking. But I spent the whole summer traveling around the western states. And the thing, I came away from that summer with I traveled the first time I traveled down the Columbia Gorge. And as I did, I had this overwhelming sense that there was something in the landscape that was waiting to be revealed. I would look at these features in the Columbia Gorge. When I showed you that huge, that waterfall with the basalt over it, that's in the Columbia Gorge. So that was the area I had traveled through in 1970. And I came away with this sense that, boy, there's something that landscape is trying to tell me. And so it goes back to that. And I just, I got very interested in this stuff because I'm interested, in science, and I love the outdoors. So, and I love a good mystery, and I love, ancient traditions. So how all this sort of came together over a period of, a couple of decades. So I began really, I would say, obsessively, really going into this in the early 80s, where it went from just more or less casual reading into, spending hours in university libraries, digging up these things, going back to the early geologists to see what were they saying, why did they believe that the history of the Earth had been catastrophic, and it just accelerated.
Well, it doesn't seem like a ridiculous idea at all when you consider what we see on the moon. The moon is so fascinating because we can look right at it. There's no oceans, there's no forests. We can see the evidence of impacts all over it, just completely covered.
Completely covered.
With our minds living in this very small window of life.
Mm-hmm.
If we're lucky, we get 100 years, and then, of course, we have the history, which goes back to about 7,000+ years.
Yeah.
There's not enough to really to represent what we're looking at when we look at the moon.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the moon, that's covered with craters. We're looking at potentially billions of years of impacts.
Yes, and the assumption that those impacts ceased hundreds of millions or billions of years ago is clearly not correct.
There's no evidence that it ceased or why it would cease. And
right.
When we look at how many known near-Earth objects are floating around.
Well, in the last few years, there's been dozens of close flybys.
There was one the other day that had a fucking moon.
Yes. So,
something that flew by that had its own moon.
Yeah, that's wild. And so, think about this, George. Here's what's happening. We've got geologists who are looking at the crust of the Earth and discovering that, if we strip away the biosphere and the oceans and account for plate tectonics, the Earth is going to look like the moon.
Checking.
Right? There are now hundreds of identified craters, right? At the same time, astronomers are looking out into the near-Earth neighborhood of space and discovering, wait a second, we assumed that, we were pretty much isolated, that there was nothing else going on. We're now realizing that near-Earth space is densely populated. The inner solar system is densely populated with cosmic debris. And this stuff is whizzing by us all the time. And now, at the same time, you've got paleontologists who are looking at the record of life and realizing that the record of life is not a smooth curve, it's seesaw. Life proliferates and then suddenly, like the hammer comes down and you have these mass extinction events.
So this is our time right now, but it could have very easily end. And there could be some new bug-like creature that takes over and becomes super smart a billion years from now.
To me, it all comes down to this. This, to me, is like, okay, human species on planet Earth, it's time for you to grow up and start paying attention to the bigger picture. Because whether you like it or not, you're a part of the bigger picture. And if we finally accept the fact that maybe our predecessors have undergone, in a sense, cultural mass extinctions, it suddenly implies that we can't take our own unending future for granted. That we have to incorporate this bigger picture into our thinking. And the evidence continues to, yes, like here. This was just from 2011. Multiple lines of evidence for possible human population decline, settlement, reorganization during the early Younger Dryas. In the 4 years since this was published, more evidence has emerged that yes, the events that caused the mass extinction of half the great mega mammals on Earth did not leave the rest of the mammals, the rest of the animals unscathed, including humans. And there's now emerging evidence, hard scientific evidence, that the human population crashed during the Younger Dryas.
So this would completely coincide with Graham Hancock's ideas about the Sphinx. The Sphinx,
absolutely,
showing very clear, according to Robert Schoch, Boston University geologist
John Anthony West,
that there is clear evidence of water erosion in the Sphinx,
Yes.
which would indicate thousands of years of rainfall, where there hasn't been rainfall in the Nile Valley since, like, I believe it was 9,000 BC.
Yeah.
So that's 11,000 years
Yes.
ago. It's
Yes.
all the same stuff.
It's all the same stuff.
God, this is crazy.
Yeah, we're on the verge of a major paradigm shift. And where it's going to go remains to be seen.
We live in a shooting gallery.
Listen, it's not an exaggeration to say that we are sitting down in a shooting gallery. Exactly. But the point is, here's the point, is the only thing that's, see, it's like, what was it, in the book of Matthew, there's an interesting quote, and I'm not thumping the Bible here, but the Bible is full of, just like all the traditions of ages agone, the Bible is full of some very powerful, interesting stuff. There's a part in here where one of the disciples asked Jesus about, when are we going to know about the end of days? And he says, well, as it was in the days of Noah, when the people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage, so will it be again in the days, the end of days, when the flood comes, and the people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the flood came and swept them away. So will it be again at the end of days.
So what that seems to indicate to me is that we just get comfortable and relaxed and do well.
Yes.
And when we do well, that's when we get hit by the...
It's not saying that the everyday stuff, the stuff of everyday life, there's anything wrong. It's not saying that. It's just saying, if we get so preoccupied with the minutiae and the trivia of everyday life, to the exclusion of the bigger picture, that's when we open ourselves up.
But this is really funny. I've had these weird conversations with people about asteroidal impacts over the years, because before I even met you, I've been obsessed with this stuff. Not nearly as much as when I met you in Atlanta and we started talking, then I got really into it. But they would talk about the asteroids that killed the dinosaur. Oh, today we'd be able to stop that. And I'm like, okay,
Acknowledged.
is that true? And then I started looking into it. Well, what has been done? This is nothing. Some fucking theories.
See, here's the thing. Potentially, yes, we could stop that. We could do it. And really, you know, within a decade or two, yes, we could do that. Right now, potentially. But see, what happened on February 15th of 2014, when that little meteor came in and exploded over Chelyabinsk, Siberia, injured 1,500 people. Now, you know, and damaged thousands of buildings. That was a wake-up call, right? That was a little speck. It was a little speck. Now, here's the thing. If it had been a little bigger, a little denser, if its angle of approach had been a little steeper, if its velocity had been a little bit greater, we might have been looking at thousands of deaths rather than just injuries.
And Tunguska, as you said, only 150 foot wide.
Only a 150-foot wide object, right. So that's very, very small in the cosmic sense.
That's just room.
Yeah, well, it's the building.
From here to the front door.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's not that big.
It's not that big. What you got, though, is velocity. And you think, like, you know, think of say, a .38 slug. It's not big. If I was to throw it at you, even as hard as I could, it might sting a little bit, but it wouldn't do any damage. But if it came out of a gun with a muzzle velocity of 1,000 feet per second, think about that little thing and what the damage it would do to you.
Yeah.
And see, that's the thing about an asteroid or a meteorite or a comet coming in. It's moving really, really fast. You know, so that's why, like I said, it packs such a powerful punch.
Right. And some of them are even made of iron.
Some of them are made of iron. So if there's a moral to all of this, it's simply this. Look, we are the one species that could prevent the type of mass extinctions that have dominated the biosphere of this planet for a couple of hundred million years.
Or we could keep putting our resources to fracking.
Yeah, well, I still haven't made up my mind about fracking yet. But, you know, I do believe that what we need to do is be thinking of, if we're going to extract the resources of this planet,
all runs together, doesn't it?
Way that what we're doing is implementing the transcendence of human culture into the
No substitute for a full magazine.
That is the destiny of terrestrial life, is that terrestrial life wants to become cosmic. It knows on some level that as long as life is confined to the surface of a planet, it's vulnerable. But, and you know, without getting into all of this, there's growing evidence, that life originally came to this planet from space, right? Was seeded here probably through comets that carry organic material. All the
panspermia, right?
Panspermia, exactly. So here's the thing, if you're an environmentalist and rightfully critical of some of the things that humans are doing to disrupt the environment, you got to, though, place in context the fact that nature itself has done things to the environment that so far exceed anything we have done yet. What I showed you with that slide, showing the ice sheets over Canada. Think about this. Suppose
Lost too much when the Red Legion hit us.
Got a contract from the government, U.S. and Canadian governments, to clear cut every forest from like the 47th parallel up to the Arctic Circle, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. We're going to cut every single tree from the northern United States up to the tree line in northern Canada. We're going to cut
Solving problems on the world,
billions of trees. We're going to cut every single tree. We would rightfully be up in arms and say, no, you're not going to do that, right? But what do you think that ice did? It wiped out. There's evidence now that 35 and 40,000 years ago, there were forests growing up there, right? A few thousand years later, the ice has bulldozed everything. There's no forests growing under 2 miles of ice, right? Imagine if we said, well, we're going to just decimate the shallow marine ecologies. We're going to go in there and we're going to just wipe out the coral reefs. We're going to overfish them till there's nothing left.
Lost too much when the Red Legion hit us.
Less than 400 feet is, below sea level. Well, what do you think a drop in 400 feet in the sea level did to the shallow marine ecologies, to the coral reefs that were growing there? You see, that's what I'm just saying. It's not to justify that we can ransack nature.
Let's talk.
Willy-nilly, but it's to say we have to have a realistic context for thinking about this. And bear in mind, the environmental movement was born during an era of total gradualistic dominance in the 50s and 60s. If you go back then, again, only the fringe, the fringe science people like Velikovsky and others were talking about catastrophes. The assumption was that all global change occurred one grain of sand, one drop of water at a time, right? Well, we've come 180 degrees from that model of Earth history, but our thinking has not really evolved to incorporate such a dynamic planet, at this point. Now, see, so when the environmental movement was born, it was easy to think that if all change had happened at this imperceptibly slow rate, then obviously the humans have accelerated that pace of change, and humans are now contributing to more global change than we've seen in millions of years. If that uniformitarian or gradualistic model was correct, but it's not. And I'm afraid that there's a large faction of the environmental movement that's still locked into that thinking of a gradual evolution of the planet, one grain of water, one drop of water, one grain of sand at a time, and it has not suffered any kind of disruption until we bad humans came along and started, with our factories and our oil wells and our SUVs and everything else. But, clearly, we have to come to terms with the fact that we live on one hell of a dynamic planet.
And one hell of a dynamic solar system.
One hell of a dynamic
Without Jupiter, right, we'd be fucked a long time
We
ago.
would be. Somebody said they wanted to hear me say the word fuck at least once. So I'll throw out, go ahead and throw, we would be fucked.
Jupiter is the big kind of, like the for all the bigger asteroids to get sucked into.
Well, Jupiter can play a dual role. See, Jupiter can act as the bouncer that kicks a lot of those guys back out, back out into the Kuiper disk or wherever they came from. But it can also hurtle stuff in towards us. It can do either one.
Sacred geometry is a subject that I wanted to talk to you about because we could go on about cataclysmic impacts forever, but it's one of the things that you mentioned at the end of our last podcast that you wanted to talk about on this one. And it's the name of your organization, Sacred Geometry.
What's the name of the website? I could find some stuff here to show you about that. And it dovetails, because remember, we're talking here a lot about geometry, right? They both are sciences that have evolved out of the study of the Earth. And, one of the things I've done is, in geology, we have this thing called scale invariance.
I can help you.
If you look at a geological picture, you're always going to see somebody. You're going to see like a rock pick set in the picture. You're going to see a person standing there, because oftentimes you don't have a sense of the scale of what you're looking at, right? And in geometry, we have the same phenomena. It's also kind of a modern term for it is fractalization, where the
all runs together, doesn't it?
The smaller part looks like the bigger whole, and that's one of the basic working ideas of sacred geometry. And it's
lost too much when the Red Legion hit us.
Standing there looking into the Minnesota River Valley. This was an example of scale invariance. That you had the same, that the big channel was just a much, much larger version of this small channel. And that if you didn't have a scale of reference, you couldn't tell really what you're looking at, how big or how small it is. So in the study of sacred geometry, one of the fundamental ideas is this idea of scale invariance. So when
I can help you.
First was interested in geometry, because geometry, I think, is one of the keys to deciphering many of the ancient traditions. Like, I became somebody wanted me to talk about Freemasonry, and I, can talk about that up to a certain extent. One of the things that I learned, as soon as I think I learned it before I was actually initiated into the
all
Masonic
runs together, doesn't it?
1978, was that at the core of all the Masonic symbolism was geometry. If you wanted to understand the message of the great cathedrals, you had to have geometry. If you wanted to understand this amazing plethora of symbolism of which Masons are the custodians, you had to study geometry. And secondarily, you had to study astronomy. So that sort of confirmed some of the ideas I had already been thinking at the time that I went in the late 70s. Freemasonry is full of symbols.
I won't forget everyone we lost. I won't.
Because for one thing, I've always loved art. I come from a family of builders. I build things for a living. That's what I do. I design things and I build things for a living. That's how I make my money. So I was always interested in the built environment. And somewhere along the line, I just began to realize that there was a whole lot more
just
to the
here,
built
Guardian?
environment of ancient times. That in modern times, you look at architecture, and that architecture
lost too much when the Red Legion hit us.
Symbolical, except on a very abstract sense. I became aware of the fact that the ancient architecture, the ancient structures, whether it's the pyramids of Giza or Stonehenge or Angkor Wat or the Mayan temples, they're all profoundly symbolic. They're not just built because, hey, it looks good. No, they convey information. Cathedrals, it was Victor Hugo who referred to some of the great cathedrals as being literal textbooks in stone. And that's what they are. Chartres Cathedral, beautiful example of a textbook in stone. And I don't know if you've ever been to any of the cathedrals?
No.
That's something you need to put on your bucket list, Joe.
Yeah, I'm planning on going to Europe this summer. So when I do,
Did you?
on a vacation
No,
instead
you've
of
been there a
working.
while. Yeah.
Yeah. Make it a research vacation. Make it a lot more interesting. And the more you go,
Earth's a good place.
It's tough to
Worth
do a lot
fighting
of
for.
research. We've got little kids that get bored real easy. But I'm going to check some shit out.
Yeah, check some shit out. And I can send you some places that I don't know about your kids, but I could easily have been 8 years old and been totally blown away by it.
Okay. Well, one of the things about the Freemasons, the idea of the Freemasons, is that it's a secret society.
Yeah.
And this secret, and people associated with the Illuminati and the people that control the world.
Every little bit helps.
Don't I wish?
Trust me.
But Joe, I think I would love to be the supreme dictator of the world.
Really? What would you do differently?
Differently? We can get into that. It's going to be
that's a 5-hour podcast.
Yeah, that's a different podcast.
Right. When you say,
Let's
like,
talk.
I'm a Mason, people would automatically, especially ignorant people, would automatically assume that you're a part of some sort of society.
Don't stop fighting.
That's
We all
victimizing
appreciate it.
the general population, and you're involved with the people that put the eyeball on top of the pyramid that's on the dollar bill, and
I don't even know where to start with some of that now.
Are there secrets in the Freemasons? Are we not allowed to talk about it?
Well, bear in mind, now, secrets, in the Middle Ages, there were trade secrets.
Mm-hmm.
And, building secrets. Clearly,
I won't forget everyone we lost.
Through the process of initiation, you learned about these secrets, right? But it's not that really that different, the idea than, say, modern, commercial or industrial secrets. Coke it keeps its formula secret, right? And it's done so for 100 years.
Right.
But the thing was, is you kind of realize
Solving problems out in the
Freemasonry
world,
became
huh?
an outlawed organization.
Good for you.
Right? During the Middle Ages, when the church was persecuting anybody who was branded a heretic, which could have meant anything that they wanted it to be, Freemasonry had to go underground. And that's the primary reason for the secrecy, is because it was a survival strategy. And it only re-emerged in the early 1700s with the consolidation of 4 lodges in Britain to become the modern institution Freemasonry. And, to anybody who comes up with that, I would just challenge them, show me the hard.
Show them that they can't mess with
I
us.
like to say that, well, yeah, I'll admit, 14 of the American presidents have been Freemasons, but 22 of them were Episcopalians. So clearly that implies to me that it's the Episcopalians who are the puppet masters ruling the world, right? You don't want to make that argument.
Well, why were they Freemasons? Like, what's the benefits of being a Freemason?
Let's talk.
For one thing, what you're doing is you're aligning yourself with probably the oldest institution that still exists on the planet.
No substitute for a full magazine.
And trace it back to the Middle Ages. But if you go back further than that, while the historical continuity breaks down, we can go back and we can talk about the Comachines in Italy. We can talk about the Martinists. We can talk about the Mithraeus tradition. We can talk about the mysteries of Egypt. We can talk about the Zoroastrian tradition. The list goes on. The Eleusinian mysteries.
I can help you.
See is a structure of initiation that's virtually identical in all these cases to what modern Freemasonry is.
By the symbology it uses.
With modern Freemasons, basically, you have a whole cross-section of individuals that join, who a lot of them joined simply because, hey, my dad was a Freemason, or my uncle, it was a family tradition. So that's why I joined. Others joined because Freemasons every year raise millions of dollars for charity, mostly for children's charitable causes. They run the Scottish Rite Hospital for crippled and burned children. They run eye hospitals, and children that need medical care. They can go to these hospitals and not have to pay anything. So they're a fraternal organization. They're one of the largest charitable organizations on the planet in terms of the money that they raise. Again, Jesus said, by their works ye shall know them. You can twist that around, perversely twist that around and say that's some kind of nefarious strategy to, whatever, get control. The other side of the equation is that they're also custodians of this body of ancient symbolism, where all of these things that we have been talking about basically are encoded. And I could pull up some interesting stuff here that you could look at to see what we're actually talking about there. But yeah, they have this amazing body of symbolism. Let me pull it. Here's an example of a Masonic apron. Okay, let's take a look at this. We'll zoom in here. And what do you see? Right at the very center of this symbolical array. What is that?
I think it's a barn.
It's not a barn.
Is that the Ark?
It's the Ark. It's probably
That's
from
Noah's Ark.
It's Noah's Ark.
So that's supposed to be the ocean around it, and that thing.
It's floating in the waters of the Great Flood. And if you look closely, I know it's hard to tell, but growing out of here,
It's a chicken.
it's an acacia. The acacia is
an acacia bush.
It's a Masonic symbol for rebirth, regeneration, rejuvenation. So the idea here is that in that ark is preserved all of the seeds, the biological diversity of the world that is now being erased from the planet by the waters of the flood.
The acacia, is it related to the acacia tree or the acacia bush? Is it the same sort of thing?
Yeah.
And that's the same bush that they believe was responsible for Moses having the visions of God. So what are giving him the 10 Commandments? Because the acacia bush is rich in dimethyltryptamine. The flaming bush being symbolic of somehow or another extracting the DMT from that, smoking it or lighting it on fire, and that being the transmission method for the dimethyltryptamine, which of course is one of the most profound psychedelic experiences and gives people this feeling of being in contact with the divine.
Now, do you think it's any coincidence that the Freemasons have venerated the acacia for hundreds of years?
It makes a lot of sense.
Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, there's modern day scholars who are looking at this story of Moses and connecting it to some sort of a psychedelic trip.
Yeah.
Help me.
Here is
Which is another thing that's slowly being exonerated today. Those
Yeah.
ideas are being vindicated today.
Yes.
In a way that before, you would say just a few decades ago that somehow or another Moses was on drugs. You're like, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
And people would just, and any real, legitimate sort of stories being connected to psychedelic drugs, people would think it was being preposterous. And now it's more and more accepted every day.
Right.
Why
Well,
is
simply
the
because
earth
the
one
evidence
true
is
enemy?
accumulated.
It's overwhelming.
So
The
has
Eleusinian,
always
no
been.
question, in the Eleusinian mysteries, they were imbibing some type of a consciousness altering substance. I think that there's no question during the Mithraic mysteries also they were.
They don't know what that was, though, right?
Not exactly, unless I think, who was it, maybe Albert Hoffman and a couple others, they wrote a book in the 70s on the Eleusinian mysteries where they were talking about that, and I read it so long ago I've kind of forgotten what their final conclusion was, but it was definitely that they were doing some type of a psychedelic potion.
Well, even soma, if you go back to Hindus, the soma being some sort of a mystery concoction. They don't know what it was, but it most likely had some sort of psychedelic properties to it. They just don't know what it was.
They don't know exactly what it was.
Isn't it amazing when you consider the fact that this stuff was so profound and so important to them? Now we don't even know what was in it. Most likely some concoction that probably included psychedelic mushrooms.
Yeah. Well, I'm convinced that one of the great boons to humankind was psychedelics, and that it was a profound. We should have venerated it as ancient cultures did. It provided a context in which people could do it with wisdom, and propriety, rather than driving it underground, and turning it into a criminal enterprise. That has been, I think, had enormously destructive consequences for our society by criminalizing this for the last half century.
Yeah, well, most certainly, and you can see the difference in the art of the 1960s, especially when it comes to music, the difference between the 60s and the 70s.
Mhm.
The shallow nature of a lot of the music that came out of the 70s
Right.
and the disco and all that stuff. And then
Yeah.
look at what was going on in the 60s with Hendrix and
Yeah.
Jim Morrison, most likely psychedelic related.
Oh, of course it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine. We got you. You're getting good at this.
That's you. You're gonna need an insulin shot every day.
Another catch and its crew bring violence to the system. Show them its futility. Proceed to the captain's quarters. There we may find their leader.
And whatever else these salty buccaneers got stashed away.
The relic she seeks. Perhaps they're holding out for better pay. caution, Guardian.
Caution? You got the Guardian all wrong. Hit him with everything you got, hero.
position. She spoke to me of her pain. She was truthful when others were not.
These are gestures, not actions. Aramis will never change.
No. She saved me from the Lucent Hive. Isn't that enough?
I wish that it were.
Nice place.
Thanks. Been renting 5 years.
Did you know? Paying rent can now raise your credit scores instantly. Free with Experian. Wait, rent can help my credit? It can now with Experian Boost.
It worked.
About time. Now rent can boost your credit scores instantly. Free with Experian. Download the Experian app now.
This sketch contains stolen goods. Find them so they might fulfill a better purpose.
Booking.com, we don't limbo, but I got back to think we do offer free cancellation. You can go. Book with free cancellation for peace of mind. Booking.com, booking.yeah.
The time has come. Watch season 3 of Jack Ryan, now streaming on Prime Video.
I sense an opportunity. Secure that cabal. Our crew servitor answers your call.
What we came for. Now it's time to celebrate.
These riches are for the elixir of the last city, not for your debauchery.
Aw, don't be a spoil sport, Captain Kell. Even charity ought to be a little fun. Those crazy wretches are on their way in. I love those guys.
Looking for something new to do? Deliver with DoorDash. You'll keep your own hours, keep making money, and keep things interesting. Because that's how you roll. It's easy. Just pick up, drop off, and cash out the same day. Get started today at DoorDash.com/go.
This one can hardly be called a pirate lord. He's named Frisk. Just a drag in too deep to know he's already dead. My associates have given me concerning information. Our interlopers may have found this one first. Find out who's after my goods. Medicine. Well, he was lucky to have lived this long. Personally, I stay away from these loose and fine. I don't trust anyone that loyal. Clear them out. Into the light, so to speak. The Lucent Hive is searching for the relics, and Aramis's crews are overwhelmed. How interesting. These relics just became more valuable. Demand, it seems, is very high. Luck was on our side this time. And now these pests stand in our way. How unfortunate for them.
We want to change this restaurant. We have to change the chemistry.
I wanted to speak with you, Jermaine.
Whoa! What kind of books you been reading? It's been Drifter for a long while now.
Drifter, then. You have kept secrets from us since the beginning. It is unkind to withhold knowledge.
Unkindness was never my aim. Apologies, sister.
Accepted. Do you have any insight as to why the Lucent Hive are interested in the relics?
Power is freedom, and everybody's chasing it. From the biggest freaky moth monster to the lowest space pirate.
But while the Lucent Hive are loyal to Savathun, the pirates enjoy a startling degree of freedom already. They're not constrained by office or honor. They are ruled only by their own desires.
Yeah, it might look that way from the outside, but they've got to fight for everything they get. That's just survival. A meal and a bed that don't come at the end of a blade? That's freedom.
You are drawing a comparison.
Me? Look, I get it. Walking away from folks can feel like freedom. If no one's relying on you, there's no one to disappoint. No one to be disappointed by.
Now you are speaking of Mizraxkel. I do not judge him for who he was, but he treated me like a hatchling.
Can't really blame him for not wanting to discuss it. Shame's a hard thing to shake. Harder if you have to share it.
You are saying I should forgive him.
That's your call, sister. I'm just saying, I get it.
Aramis seeks freedom for our people. But her freedom is vengeful. She wishes to be free from her shame. She will sacrifice Elixni lives in its pursuit, and it will never end. Thank you, Drifter.
You know, I don't hear that enough.
I greet you, Guardian. I wished to speak to you earlier, but I did not have the words. I will not apologize, as I believe the secrets of my old life were mine to keep. But I do regret. I am ashamed of my cruelty. I greet you, Guardian. I wished to speak to you earlier, but I did not have the words. I will not apologize, as I believe the secrets of my old life. I want that loot. Let's make a deal. Let's make a deal. Until we meet again.
Everyday savings at the Everything Store, K&B. Now ask your K&B pharmacist for a $3 coupon good on your next new or transferred prescription.
Spear boost raised my credit score by 12 points instantly, which is insane.
Raised my score by 21 points instantly. Literally, as soon as I pressed the button.
Boost your credit scores instantly. Right, only at Experian.com/boost.
caught you, Guardian. I didn't want you setting off after Aramis without a little warning first. What's that look? You don't survive as long as me without being able to smell trouble. And honestly, kid, you stink of it. You've been cutting a swath through those pirates out there, but don't get complacent. Watch your opponent, but watch your back, too. You're going after chunks of a dead disciple of the Witness, and you've almost got them all. That's some serious juju. The stakes are high. That's when folks tend to get...
picture night. A couple of cocktails. An edible. And a nature documentary. In common, a friend like you who offered a ride. Or made sure they got on a ride share. Or provided a couch to crash on. Thanks for keeping the roads a little safer tonight, Washington. Together, we get there.
Kaido's forces tried to secure this facility ahead of us, but they weren't able to make it past the towers. Keep out of sight.
When the Warmind is fully restored, we'll need this location to access the orbital station and its Warsat network.
I know. One step at a time. All right, you're at the bunker entrance. No idea what internal defenses are like. Stay alert.
Look at the state of this facility. It's an absolute travesty. Established level 1 security clearance. Opening the door for you, Guy.
power situation down here is pretty bleak. Our enemies are harvesting arc energy from the reactor. We need to restore power to the inner doors to press forward. This place really is in rough shape, isn't it?
You should be able to reboot the main reactor up ahead. I think the facility will hold together.
You think?
On the same presentation at the same time. Vonage does that.
If you stand in those pools of soul fire, the energy should let you bypass those hive shields.
console should be activated now. It will allow you to restart the facility's auxiliary reactor.
Auxiliary reactor is online and the station is powered up. To make it look like we were trying to find some information in the digital archives here.
I've taken the liberty of preparing a power reroute switch for the launch authorization systems. Though it appears Rasputin has changed the launch codes, I'm locked out.
We'll hit that next time. Keep the baddies guessing until we're ready to make our move. Good work, Guardian. Let's get you out of here before reinforcements arrive.
Patch me into Misrax.
Osiris. When he wakes up, will he remember me?
When the stakes are high at work, your tone matters. Grammarly's advanced tone suggestions can help. Because when you write with just the right confident tone, you can meet any challenge to move your project forward. Grammarly's advanced tone suggestions can help you find just the right personable tone to motivate and build trust with your team. Grammarly's advanced tone suggestions can help you find just the right positive tone to close that important deal. Yes, getting the tone just right.
Two submine cores in the bag, and launch pod scouted. So, we're making progress. Ikora officially wants us wrangling this situation. She'd like Osiris in a hands-off role, but he's watching.
Of course, Rasputin changed the launch codes. That blasted paranoid machine. I never understood Anastasia's obsession with teaching the war mind independent thought. That only made it more difficult to control. No matter. I will find the new launch codes eventually. But the station will prove useless if we do not rebuild Rasputin first. Even with the Malahayati submine reintegrated into its AI core, the war mind is incomplete. We must find another source of data. I will put my mind to the task. In the meantime, continue retrieving submine data from the vaults that we know remain in...
Working late.
Aren't you?
Zane wants to know if you'd like some tea, coffee, whatever it is you drink.
That's thoughtful of him.
I used to say the same thing. How thoughtful. Thank you, Saint. Except I never looked up. Not once. My eyes were on my fingers stained with ink. The smudges on the margins of my work. I cared more about my findings than the tea cooling beside me. Or the feelings of the man who made it. You're not listening.
I am listening.
And listen well. Your work will outlive you. The people around you might not. One day you're going to wake up, assuming you've even slept at all, and realize that the world is a very different place than the last time you remembered to look at it. You will abruptly, viscerally regret the absence of something as small as a single cup of tea. So I ask you again, what would you like to drink?
Oolong.
He's lying! That's what he does! That's all he does!
Clovis is the only one who knows how to reintegrate Rasputin with his subminds.
Did he tell you how? Or is he just dangling it in front of you so that you keep him around?
I remember a dinner that ended like this. Elizabeth, you haven't changed a day.
Are you sure he has what you need?
I haven't verified, but
he's the only hope left. As much as you'd like to deny it, Elizabeth, I'm the best you've got.
Go to hell. I'm here now. We should talk more, later, without him around.
I'm sorry you had to see that. They've always been very emotional.
I'd hit you if I could.
I have found a solution to our submind problem. Your arrogant friend, Osiris, informed me of the time wounds on Mars. Windows into the past, worlds lost to time. And it so happens that Rasputin's mind lab is situated within such a temporal anomaly.
Oh, that's gonna be cool.
Scans indicate that the Charlemagne submind data still exists within the wound's projected time period. Copying it into the engram will provide code fragments we need to restore Rasputin. Go retrieve additional submind data, then return to the Seraph facility. I will guide you to the location of the new launch codes upon your arrival.
Your last raid yielded a surprising fragment of intel. This was found in the pirate hideout, along with the relic.
You forget your place, Erix. I am no longer the ship stealer. I am a Kell, and your obedience is my right. Deliver the relic as agreed, and I will overlook your attempts to extort me. Do it, or face the wrath of a power you cannot imagine.
I believe Aramis Kell references the Witness. Perhaps she really has abandoned her calls for Elixni unity.
That. Oh my god.
your little pink gremlin feet. Hee hee.
Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K.
No need to pre-rinse. Cascade Platinum has scrubbing and rinsing built right. Then just scrape, load, and you're done.
Unless you treat dandruff regularly, it will keep coming back. Try Head & Shoulders. It contains zinc purifyone, which fights the germ that causes dandruff, and when used regularly, helps prevent it from coming back. For up to 100% dandruff protection, use Head & Shoulders.
Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gershwan, and today we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite, the Hive City. We have some new information and more interesting details of the life on a Hive City. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you have any suggestions about anything, please comment down below. And if you enjoy our content, like our patrons on Patreon, it is because of them that we can do this. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the Hive Cities of the Imperium. The Imperium's population is so vast that it is unimaginable to the regular human mind. A high percentage of these individuals are concentrated in enormous urban sectors. These cities grow so large that their borders overlap one another, sprawling until there is no more space in which to expand, except upward or downward. The largest of these conglomerations are known as Hive Cities. Layered constructions of plasteel and rockery stacked endlessly upon each other. Many are thousands of years old, dating to a time before the Imperium itself. Over time, these cities have grown until they tower over the landscape, man-made mountains whose spires pierce the atmosphere. Within each vaulted layer of Hive City stands edifice after edifice, linked by narrow streets and punctuated by billowing smokestacks. Within these jungles of concrete and metal live the people of the Imperium. The standard Imperial citizen varies in form and appearance, just as each hive world varies in its own structure. While there is a generally agreed upon baseline human standard, consisting of 4 limbs, 1 head, 20 digits, and so on, the local urban environment and genetic stock has caused all manner of interesting anomalies, evolutionary adaptations, and fashions. These differences are usually cosmetic in effect. However, the more radical alterations walk the line between accepted variation and outright mutation. It is a subject of intense debate amongst the upper echelons of the Imperium as to what it is to be a human, and therefore acceptance into the Imperium of man. But in reality, many of the people that contemplate these questions are equally distant from what we would consider a standard human. Certain hive planets will possess notable physical adaptations that deviate from the norm, perhaps a particular type of nose or skin color that has become the dominant variation of the population as a whole. while in others, a clear physical division will exist between various sections of the hive. For example, the people near the bottom of the hive city that haven't received natural light in many generations will possess larger eyes and evolve to combat the dark environments, while the population that lives closer to natural light will possess normal human-sized eyes, but their skin will be heavily pigmented to resist the electromagnetic radiation of the planet's sun. This is just a simple brief example, but many populations in the Imperium possess unnatural adaptations as a consequence to their local environments. Some hive cultures may even possess certain ideals of beauty that dramatically alter the look of their people. Certainly, many strange and terrible gangs of the Underhive have been discovered, clad in hyper-fashioned armor, sporting glowing electors and skull studs, gang tribal mutilation, and shift scars with pride. To some extent, a similar appearance and culture binds the people of a hive planet together into a common stock. Usually citizens of the Imperium will prefer to spend time with their fellow natives of their own hive. That said, however, mankind has ever been titillated by the exotic, so friendships, love affairs, and even children between hive classes is not unknown in hive planets, so long as the culture legitimizes the relationship. Surprisingly, for an empire as big as the Imperium of Man, visitors to a hive city will almost always be greeted by others who speak Low Gothic, sometimes referred to as simply as Gothic. This is the official language of trillions of human beings in the Imperium of Man. Low Gothic was derived over many millennia from the prior common language used by the Human Interstellar Federation that existed during the Dark Age of Technology, now simply called High Gothic. Linguistic drift and hybridization with other languages, possibly even xeno-languages, have created this common Low Gothic. And although it is a common tongue of humanity, there are a variety of dialects spoken throughout different hive cities. Sometimes these dialects develop variations from hive sector to hive sector. Whatever language is spoken within a hive city, a universal practice witnessed not only in hive cities, but every single planet of the Imperium, will be prayer to the Emperor of Mankind. From factory workers to Imperial savants, every citizen of a hive city will show veneration to the God of mankind in the form of prayer. Right before work, before a meal, or even in between their downtime, they thank the Emperor for what they have and pray to him for what they desire. As most citizens of the hive city are poorly educated, often knowing only enough to complete their jobs, prayer and teachings of the Imperial Church are all they know of a galaxy or a world beyond their particular hive zone. As far as the job of a regular Imperial citizen, most hivers are often born into a house or family with their vocations already decided. Thus they work endlessly at their task in the factorums or industrial halves of their hives, producing goods to be shipped off worlds or maintaining the many systems of the hive that are essential for their survival. There is a definite class division in most hives. Resources become scarcer as one descends from the spires at the hive top, where the rulers enjoy all the wealth of the Imperium has to offer, down through the guild and houses where some live in relative comfort, to the lower levels where workers and dregs exist in crushing poverty. The farther downhill one goes, the more decayed and dangerous it becomes. In many ways, the hive world is a perfect expression of life in the Imperium, and the result of what it has done to survive within a hostile and decaying galaxy. Hive-worlders reflect this too, and are resourceful and hardy in a way that only those born into an overcrowded society with finite resources can be. Within a hive, only the strong survive, and only those who are both strong and cunning truly prosper. Even those who choose not to break the law are often forced to bend it to get their way. The oppressive nature of life within the hive is often devoid of any opportunities that a man does not make for himself. Positions within the system of control within a hive city is one route a hive-worlder can take, becoming part of the administratum or the ministorum in an effort to live above the law or at least have some control over it. Equally, he might rise to the governance of his family house, trade cartel, or other group, though such a position is usually only covered by another kind of obligation or duty. The alternative is to reject the trappings of society and embrace the criminal element or be branded an outcast. Both can bring great wealth and personal freedom, but a man does this at his own peril, for the hammer of the hive's justice is swift and heavy. All of the great imperial organizations have their place within the structure of a hive world. The administratum, the ministorum, the mechanicus, all run a hive world, and each one of these organizations creates astonishing structures that mold each individual hive city into a similar infrastructure. At the core of nearly every hive city in the Imperium can be found the sectors imperialis. Such precincts are dense with Gothic, cathedral-like structures, rising impossibly high. Here the gears of bureaucratic powers and manufacturing forces turn the cogs that churn the vast edifices of the Imperium itself. A typical hive city within the Imperium stretches across hundreds, if not thousands of miles. Standard urban anatomy has dwellings and heavier industry near the base levels. The administration and light manufacturing runs from ground level to the lowest tiers of the upper hive, while the wealthiest classes rule from the spires high above the ground beneath them. The subsurface, or the underhive, is where the poorest dregs inevitably gather, and the farthest down one travels, the more lawless and desperate things become. The Imperium has affixed official designations to different sectors found within a hive city, but every hive city is different. The most common of these classifications are the sector's peripheries. These are the outskirts beyond the hive's borders. The Imperialis, which is the main hive levels, the Mechanicus, which is the heavy industrial zones, the Spirum, which is the upper spires, the Habculums, which is the vast habitational blocks, and the Infernus, which is either the underways or the underhives. Out of all these classifications, the Sector Imperialis is by far the most common. It describes the most varied and populated of divisions within the hive. In such sectors can be found teeming billions of citizens. There, laborers toil for long shifts in workshops, making ammunition, chemical agents, processed foods, or countless other synthetic wares. The majority of the hives are self-sufficient, with all human requirements such as nourishment, water, and air produced and recycled within the sectors Imperialis. It is true that such products, including the atmosphere itself, are gritty, polluted, and unwholesome, but they are capable of sustaining life. While many different edifices make up the Sector Imperialis, most are rendered in the classic architectural style adapted by the Imperium. They are vast and grimly Gothic. The most abundant buildings are those controlled by the Adeptus Administratum. The Adeptus Administratum is the largest of all the departments of the Adeptus Terra. It is so impossibly unwieldy that some of the different branches work at odds with each other, pursuing contradicting goals and even supplying contradictory information. An administratum building could house any number of governmental agencies, such as those that deal with the tithe collection, psychoregistration, or historical revisions. Each of those offices might be supported by any number of additional data mills, sensoriums, or recruiting agencies. There are hundreds of different civil offices for each planet, such as departments which deal out mining permits, track abhuman bylaws, or process inter-hive atmospheric discrepancies. The entirety of any world is recorded, filed, indexed, and updated by the monumentous army of the bureaucratic menials. The administratum buildings are nearly always identified by the sign of the Aquila on or above the door. As staggeringly ineffective as these structures are, the twin-headed eagle is still perhaps the best living symbol of the Imperium, and so they make ideal rallying points for the armies of mankind during battle. Indeed, such buildings are often targeted by the enemies, and the Chaos factions in particular take perverse delight in smashing down these icons. Ironically, thanks to the massive inconsistency in the importance of each of these structures, an enemy can never be sure when they are destroying an administratum building if they are crippling a hub of the planetary government, or simply wrecking an office that hoarded needless data. Another common sight within the Sector Imperialis is the Manufactorums. The Manufactorums are the ubiquitous factories of the Imperium. Each is controlled by one of the various branches of the Adeptus Administratum, while the Adeptus Mechanicus aids with the supply and maintenance of their machineries. Many Manufactorums house production lines that make parts of a larger assembly. For instance, there are hundreds of different buildings, and each one makes up a simple component for a specific filtration vent, and another vast structure where the product is finally assembled. Others create items from start to finish, such as the Manufactorum Lucernus, a forge plant which processes human corpses and renders them into candles, or the Cerberium, a factory that creates biofuel to power stab lights out of the fungus that proliferates within the atmospheric conductors. Most Manufactorums are marked with the symbols of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and many bear heavy blast doors. Clad in ferro steel, these imposing shutters hermetically seal the building, protecting the precious machinery inside, as well as ensuring only a portion of the often highly toxic waste they produce leaks out. Some particularly harsh industries also use blast doors to ensure their workforce can never leave. Another common Imperial building found in the Sector Imperialis are the Sanctums. The one true Sanctum Imperialis is the massive complex within the Imperial Palace on Terra. From there the Emperor ruled, and to this day still resides, interned within the Golden Throne. The secrets within the Hive City Sector Imperialis are named after this famed landmark, and it is said that some small portion of the inner light of the Emperor himself shines upon such structures, bearing the name. A beacon to the devout, each Sanctum Imperialis is an office of the Imperial cult, the only sanctioned religion in the Imperium of Man, and and is operated by the Adeptus Ministorum, commonly known as the Ecclesiarchy. Such structures are typically adorned with statues of saints, and the faithful believe the signs of the god emperor that embellish its walls and portals, guard against malignant entities and sorceries. Perhaps it is the power of faith made manifest, but in times of need, such structures often glow with a ghostly nimbus. However, only one willing to risk being branded as a heretic would suggest that the light emanates strictly from the autolumens. These are stone lanterns or sensors created within the statues. There have been numerous reports of these lights actually driving away foes, for example, sending demon shriekings into wisps of nothingness, or causing rampaging orc mobs to halt their charge and gape in dumbfounded awe. Whether these are true events or the delusions of the combat fatigued, many Imperial forces continue to look for salvation while in the presence of the Sanctum Imperialis. The Basilicum is another common feature in the Sector Imperialis. Such structures serve several purposes within a hive. First and foremost, the Basilicum is a meeting place for administration purposes, a forum for the varied branches of the Adeptus Administratum. Secondly, many of the buildings serve as civil law courts for their hive precincts, where the relevant administratum officials can resolve disputes. And finally, the most importantly to hive-dwelling citizens, the Basilicums acts as a broadcast point for the official proclamations. At any given time, multiple branches of the administratum might hold council inside one of the many halls within the Basilica. Anything from trade deals to allocation of psychic quotas are discussed. Most basilicums are built alongside an STC guideline and contain interior colonnades that divide the space into long aisles with an apse at the end of one. It is there that the official, commonly called a prefect, sits upon a raised dais to give judgment upon claims brought on by the administratum officials. Because the average hive citizen knows or cares little about the internal workings of the Adeptus Administratum, or their squabbles, it is the third function of the Basilica that interests them the most. The statues flanking the key entrances to the Basilica issue hourly statements and daily proclamations, largely propaganda in the form of thoughts for the pious citizen, but occasionally news that is important to the local precinct. Crowds gather in great numbers to hear such dispensed wisdom. Basilicums are typically named for a sponsor, often a noble from the spire. This is one way for the enterprising individual to garner status and reputation in the hive, as well as to ensure magisterium rulings over their own chosen actions. It is not uncommon for political intrigue or even open violence to determine control of the Basilica between feuding factions, although some administratum agencies resolve the differences simply by building another Basilicum. The aforementioned building types might be the most commonly found in a hive sector imperialis, but these are a minute fraction of the variety of structures found within such zones. There are innumerable shrines, garrisons, and training facilities for the Planetary Defense Force, but storage tanks, dock ports to receive transit from orbital spacecrafts, and warehouses to store it all. The largest of these are seen in heavier industrial zones, but smaller ones and countless relays can be found stretching out in a sprawling web throughout a maze of hive's infrastructure. There are also maglev lines that run across hives, going over, under, or through the endless rows of buildings. Maglev stations allow cargo or people to move vertically to the upper or lower levels. Tangles of weathered gantries crisscross the skyline. Enormous statues commemorating anything from heroes of the Imperium to a particularly ego-driven planetary governor. Running through all levels of the hive are coils of cables, vents, access tunnels, pipeworks, and draining canals. These features are large and more prevalent in more industrialized areas, but can be found throughout every sector. Ruins are also commonplace in any hive, and come in many shapes, sizes, and degrees of structural integrity. Where fighting has been particularly fierce, entire sections of hives are nothing but craters and few skeletons of twisted girders. In some forlorn districts, shanty towns exist, although these are more common in the underhive or outskirts. Such scrap-built buildings can be found anywhere, teeming with mutant outcasts, savage gamers, and practitioners of prescribed religions. And the reason these slums are tolerated by the imperial governors of a hive city is because every imperial adepta knows the age-old saying that humanity is 3 missed meals away from complete anarchy. In any given hive, millions must live together in jostling proximity, utterly dependent on the complex and gargantuan infrastructure for the mere basics of daily life, such as food, power, light, and even clean air. If widespread rioting, unrest, or serious disorder is allowed to ferment, it is possible that the threads binding the hive city together may be broken, and millions may suffer as a result. It is said by some that this is one reason why the phenomena of the underhive is allowed to exist in some form or another within most hive worlds, as a vital sinkhole for the city's human malice, sin, and discord. This is why unceasing vigilance and near totalitarian control is needed within most hive worlds. And those were 40 facts on the hive cities of the Imperium of Man. Lore on hive cities, or just like lore on the planets or the daily life of an Imperial citizen, is usually my favorite, so I love creating this type of lore. Whenever I read new content from GW, I get really excited because I get to create a video, and usually they inspire me to do some terrain. So expect some cool terrain videos pretty soon. I don't know if I've already said that, but subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and thanks for listening.